Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor. I'm Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. And I'm so pleased that you can join us this evening. That, of course, includes both our in-person audience and, of course, our online audience. A very warm welcome. It's really lovely to see you all again. This is the first lecture of the season, and it's been a few months. So really, yes, wonderful to see you all. So great, terrific. Well, we happen to have a really wonderful talk to start our season. Newport Cottages, 1835 to 1890, the summer villas before the Vanderbilt era, with author Michael Kathrens. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our partner in tonight's presentation, the Royal Oak Foundation, and I want to thank them for their help in promoting this event, especially Jenny and Kayla, and to welcome all their members here this evening, as well, of course, our members and our audience. So thank you again for being here. I also want to acknowledge the publisher of this wonderful book, Beth Doherty of Bauer and Dean, who is here this evening. Beth, maybe would you, am I putting you on the spot? I just want to say, because Beth is like a really amazing independent, yes. And I want to take this opportunity to thank her and every other independent publisher for their vital contribution to publishing.
Yes.
I will also take this opportunity to mention our bookseller, Amy, who is at the back of the room. And Amy's from Books on Call, a mobile book service, and she will be happy to sell you a copy of this fabulous book. For the in-person audience, a reminder to switch off your phones, or to mute them. You don't have to switch them off. If you could mute them, that would be great. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, and there may be many people here who've heard this before, so accept my apologies. A brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanic and Tradesmen of the City of New York is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1785 by 22 skilled craftsmen. Today, our 239-year-old organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our various educational and cultural programs. These include our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, which we have our students returning next week, the John M. Mossman Locke Museum, which you are welcome to visit after the lecture, the General Society Library, of course, of which this lecture is taking place in this evening. And finally, our lecture series, a lecture series, I'm proud to say, that goes back to 1837. Our speaker this evening is Michael C. Kathrens, an independent scholar specializing in American residential architecture and interior decoration of the mid-19th century through the earliest 20th century. His previous books include the best-selling monograph, American Splendor, The Residential Architecture of Horace Trumbauer, 2 volumes on the private residence in New York City, Great Houses of New York, 1880 to 1930, and Great Houses of New York, 1880 to 1940. As well as Kansas City's houses, 1885 to 1938. It's now my huge pleasure to introduce to you Michael Kathrens. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, it's on. I think we're on already. What I do need is, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, anyway, I want to start off giving thank yous, and I appreciate Victoria Engel, who's the head of this, of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, as well as Karen, who introduced me right now. Thank you for the kind words. I also want to thank, I think it's Janine McCathay from the Royal Oak Foundation and Kayla Smith, also from there. And plus the 3 people that are doing some of the grunt work here, which is Meg is doing the virtual lecture, and then Angelo is helping with all the electronics and keeping me in line, and also then Amy in the back who's helping us with the book signing. So thank you all very much, and thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you all for participating out there in Zoom land or whatever. So at any rate, thank you. So we're going to start off. I will start off with this, the cover of the book. And if you ask the reason why I chose this, is because to me it's the quintessential, most beautiful mid-Victorian summer house in Newport. It's exactly what you would think when it was built. You don't have those now because all the trees have grown up, but it used to have views of the ocean, all the way out to the ocean, but now Bellevue Avenue. When that area developed, it had previously been farmland or grazing lands. So you had water all the way, views all the way to the sea from Bellevue Avenue at this point, but now they're all gone. But anyway, I think this is just really a beautiful house, which is why I selected it. So at any rate, we will go on. Let's go. And also, I just want to tell everyone, if you thought we were going to talk about these magnificent houses, and they are magnificent structures, but you're going to be very disappointed because we're not going to talk about any of these tonight. They're magnificent. I had done a book on these in 2009 called Newport Villas, which covered the European revival styles. But I thought, when I was doing the research for that book, I discovered all these other houses that were just incredibly interesting, with really interesting stories, and major architects who worked on them: New York architects, Philadelphia architects, Boston architects, and there were some really phenomenal Newport architects as well. So that's how this book kind of came into being when I thought of it. So let's go on this one, hold on. So we're going to discuss exactly why Newport became the social resort, summer resort of America, all the way through the 1930s. And it seems to be having a resurgence again. Billionaires have now rediscovered Newport, and they're buying houses and restoring them. And Stephen Schwarzman, who I'm sure you know here, who did the library, restored the library here in New York, he just bought a house called Miramar, which is a Horace Trumbauer house. And he and his wife, after they go, they're going to leave it as a museum. And I know that from pretty good authority that already he's been buying, because it's an 18th century classical house, that he's been spent over $100 million on French art and antiques and furniture, 18th century. So the billionaires have now discovered Newport again. So it's into another Gilded Age, but we're not going to talk about that either. We'll stick to this. So anyway, let's go here. Okay, see if I can get this. Okay, this is Easton's Beach. In 1870. So this is the first beach. If any of you have been there, this was off Bath Road, which is now Memorial Boulevard, that you drive past this beach. The natives call it First Beach now, but it is that. And so anyway, the drawing was done in the 1870s. You can tell because of the bustles of the women. And it must have been taken in a morning, during the morning, because in the afternoon, a red flag would go up and the men would swim nude. So so they were warning everyone, if you didn't want to see that, you had to stay away. At any rate, so Newport became this resort, became what we called the Queen of Resorts. It used to be, there were some, like Lenox was called the resort of the mountains and the Berkshires, or others would talk about the Bar Harbor in Maine would be a very prominent summer resort, but they all related. Everyone was after Newport. Newport was on its own as the top. And the reason it's called the Queen of Resorts is because it was a very matriarchal society. The great hostess of Newport are the ones that controlled really what went on in Newport. Men may have their dalliances, but they did not bring those ladies to Newport. So they had them on their yachts, or they had other towns around to visit them, but they didn't bring them into Newport. Unlike Saratoga, New York, you could see the demi-mondaine. They were all walking along in their finery on the piazzas of the great hotels there, but not in Newport. It was the women were in charge. But the reason, you wonder, there were other wonderful New England towns. Why didn't they choose those to develop this as a resort? Well, the thing is that, two things. Newport was one of the major ports before the Revolution, so you could get to it easily. And the second was slavery brought the Southerners there. Southerners were the first people that came to Newport as a summer resort to get away from the flu and, typhoid, malaria, those diseases which they had at their own down on their plantations. And so they were either in southern part of the United States or the West Indies. So that was the main reason. And it came to Newport because Newport was very lax about slavery. Nobody bothered with it. If these people wanted to come and spend money, they felt that's okay. And originally these families brought their house servants, which would be house slaves, to Newport. And later on they wouldn't do it because if they ran away, they had many helpers to get them free, the Underground Railroad, et cetera, so that kind of ended that. But that was the reason that Newport became a resort, because all these people came up here during the summer. So that was the first reason, the main reason that it became that. And it was the triangle slave trade. And so Newport made a lot of rum. That was the main product of Newport. Rum requires sugar. So they would take much of what they produced and send it on ships to Africa to trade for slaves. The slaves would then, these slaves would be on a boat, and a lot of them would be traded for sugar in the West Indies, and then the sugar would be shipped to Newport. So that was the triangle slave trade. So that was one of the main reasons. So, and it was interesting because how it developed. Also, there were a lot of American fortunes based on slavery too. I mean, northern families, because they required the cheap cotton to make clothing from the cotton fields of the South. And so that was another reason. So it was very much, people accepted it in Newport because it was part of business. And they accepted it. Not so much in other parts of New England, but a lot in Newport. Later on, after the Revolution, most of it went to Bristol, a neighboring town, Bristol, the DeWolf family, which were big slave traders, and they were there. So anyway, that's where we are. And actually, we'll just finish this up with when the Civil War was imminent, the Southerners either sold their properties in Newport or put the deeds in family members that came from the North, because these families had all intermarried. By then, the Southerners and the Northerners had all intermarried. So we do that. So prior to the 1820s, visitors coming to Newport would often, stay at boarding houses, or they might rent a whole house. And, somebody would give up their house for a month or two because they make a lot of money on it if they rent it out to these people. And so that's pretty much what happened. So it was in the grid of the town, which if any of you know it, it's called the point section and the hill section. And those are the areas that the city had developed, the colonial part of the town. And that. So, but after that, about the 1830s and 40s, it became very difficult to engage rooms. There just wasn't enough rooms in Newport. So they started building small hotels first. There's still the Fillmore House, what's on Kathrens Street. It's 2 buildings, they're apartments now, but it's still there. But then what happened, then they started building these large, luxurious hotels. So they were the Atlantic House, which is on Bellevue Avenue and Pell Street, and it's on Toro Park. I don't know if any of you know the town, but it's a park in the center of the town, sorry. And then later there was the Ocean House, which is even bigger, and it was just a further down Bellevue Avenue. In fact, there's a Stop and Shop's shopping center right on the place, the site today. So, but when it burned down after its first year, the Ocean House, they rebuilt it within a year because it had been so profitable. They wanted to get it up, and they enlarged it by 30% and then added more decorative detailing. I'll show a picture of that later. We'll do that. So because of the difficulty in engaging rooms, though, they built the hotels, but even those hotels began to be overrun. It was too crowded, and a lot of the social elect didn't like the hotels because they were too public, because anybody could join the dances there and the luncheons and things, so it was too public. Basically, those families wanted to protect their children. They wanted them to meet the right sort of people to connect with in intermarriage, dynastically speaking. And so they became, even after a few years, even these big hotels became excluded. And so people started building private houses. But before that, the big hotels did do a lot of business. When they first opened in the 30s, 40s, you had they had large lunches, because lunches were the main meal of the day. So lunches and afternoon tea dances, and then they might have an evening supper, but that was just a prelude for an early bedtime. But by the end of the 1870s and 80s, the entertainments in these halls became much grander. You know, dinners at 8:30, balls that began at 10 at night, you know, and would last till the morning hours. So that had started, and actually it started even before Mrs. Astor and her set came. There were a lot of New Yorkers in Newport before Mrs. Astor. A lot of people say, oh, she brought New Yorkers there. No, there were a lot of New Yorkers there. The Astor, two of the women Astor descendants had houses as early as 1853 in Newport, summer houses. At any rate, so what happened was they got full, they couldn't get rooms, so people decided to build their own houses. If you had your own house, you're never gonna look for, you don't have to worry about a space. It's always there. And there's a little more social cachet added to it. And also you could entertain the people that you wanted, so you didn't have, you know, what they would consider the hoi polloi. You know, they could exclude all those people. So anyway, the first purpose-built summer house that I could find was called a house called Stone Villa. And if any of you know Newport, there's the casino that was built by McKimmey and White. This used to stand right across the street. Right now, there's a big shopping center there. But this house was there, and it was built by the Middleton family of Middleton, South Carolina. They were planters. And it was funny, one of the daughters of the house said, she was so far out of town, she thought it was so far out of town that nobody would come to visit. Now, you think of it now, how funny that is, because it's right in the mix of everything. But at that time, it was out of the grid of the town itself, so far out of town, so she was concerned about that. Clearly, that wasn't a problem. At any rate, so, and then 6 years later, George Noble Jones, we'll see some of these later, I'll show you pictures when we do the house. George Noble Jones of Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and he was a Southern planter as well. He built what's known as the King Villa now, because the King Villa bought it later, but it is now owned by the Preservation Society. It's open. It's kind of a Gothic or, you know, cottage ornate, very beautifully executed. It was done in wood with a red slate roof, but what they wanted to do is give it a more stone finish. So what they did is it was paint with beige paint, but they put sand in it. So when it was put on, it gave it a little bit more of a stone look to it. Unfortunately, today, they found some other color. McKimmey and White added a wing to the house, a shingle thing. And of course, they changed it all, and it's a hideous brown color. It looks like baby poo. I know to say, it's just horrible. And I could think, why did you do that? Well, it's because of that time they did it. It was kind of I think they all see it as a mistake. But anyway, the house is there. If you're in Newport, go take a look at it. It's a beautiful earlier house. And the King family, other family, and because there's a lot of China trade families that were in Newport. So, you know, a lot of business there. They regularly don't talk about the opium that they sold. And they did a lot of opium, which was really a bad thing, but they built beautiful houses, and, you know, and they didn't seem to mind that. Anyway, right across from the Jones house, when they finished the completion of it in the 1830s, they were finishing the Ocean House was going up right across the street. But there's no letters to say that they ever complained about this. I think they liked it because it was a center of social activity then, because they hadn't switched to the individual cottages yet. They were starting the process, but they never did it. Okay, so let's go on to this. Sorry. Okay, this is Alfred Smith. Now, Alfred Smith was born in Middletown, Rhode Island, which is the town next to Newport as you go up Aquidneck Island. And he was born to a family of farmers, but he did not want to remain in that trade. So he went to, first Boston and then New York, and became a tailor. And he must have done well, because when he was a little over 30 years old, he had accumulated a fortune of $20,000, which back then was a lot of money. So he returned to Newport and decided to get into real estate. He realized that the future of Newport was private cottages. The hotel culture was going to go away. It was going to be private houses. So he, with several of his, he had investors like William Beach Lawrence and Delancey Kane. Delancey Kane was married to one of the Astor heirs. So that was one of the first Astors that was there. William Beach Lawrence, who, again, it's hard to explain about it. If you know Newport, Salve Regina owned several of the mansions in Newport, and there's one that was called Vinland, and that's where William Beach Lawrence's house was. He had the first, in Ochre Point, it was the first gentleman farm in Ochre Point. So before that, it had just been farmland. So anyway. Anyway, let's do this. So anyway, this is Smith's house, which is on Mount Vernon Street. Now, he did not choose to live out with the other rich people. This is more in town, and the house is still there. It's apartments now, and it's a beautiful house, but it was 1845, so it's a little Greek revivalish, so it's a lovely house. So this is what Alfred Smith and his investors wrought. This is the completion of it. This was done in 1865. I think it was 1878, sorry. And this is the layout of the land. So if you look at this, the original town is up on the upper right, but that was it. So you have Bellevue Avenue and Ochre Point Avenue that bisected them, and then all these little streets all were developed as estates to build villas on. And you can see the scale of it was pretty, for its era, it was very large. And in fact, originally more of them were built north, which is this direction, which is they call the Cape Catherine area. And I was walking through it one day with John Church, who used to be the architectural historian at the Newport Historical Society. And he said, if this was any other town, this would be the historic neighborhood, because the architects were tremendous, the houses were amazing. But because of the big Beaux-Arts outhouses out south, it's overlooked them. So, but that's just the way that it is, because people go to look at the big houses, they don't go to see the smaller houses so much. What also, the smaller houses often are still private, and they're still used. A few of them are still owned by the original families that built them. All right, so let me tell you one story about William Beach Lawrence. So his country estate was Ochre Point Avenue. So the big street that goes down to the beach was old Bath Road, and then it turned into what is today Memorial. But everything north of that was originally his farm, William Beach Lawrence, and he was a New York lawyer. Again, New Yorkers were there long before this disaster. And he had a house, and it was on Cliff Walk, which is where the rocks are there. And he decided he didn't want the people to have access to Cliff Walk anymore. So he built stone walls along the path. Mind you, this path where Native Americans were the first one to use this path. Then the colonials, they all used this path. So he decided he wanted, so he built stone walls. And then the townspeople just tore it down, the wall, threw it in the ocean. And so he said, well, I'll beat them. I'm going to put shards of glass in it. And they did the same thing and tore it down and threw it into the ocean. And then the state of Rhode Island finally said, basically, that the toilers of the sea have access to the sea. So all the people that had estates had to fix their pathways and make it safe. And a lot of people put berms up, some put shrubs up, and some people just left them open, because most people didn't come in your lawn, they wouldn't come into your house. But it was kind of interesting that in the end, the people of the town won, and it's still there today. And if you haven't done it, it's a remarkable walk. You have this magnificent ocean views, just beautiful. And then you have one of these wonderful houses on the other side. And it's one of the few places in the country that you actually do that, because usually land is all the way to the water, so you can't walk on it, so you couldn't. So anyway, that makes New York kind of interesting, I think. So here we have this Ochre Point, Bellevue Avenue, in the center there, goes all the way out and then turns to the right and leads to what is now called Bailey's Beach, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then they created an ocean drive all the way out, that went all the way around that peninsula out there, and then came back in town. And it was completed at the end of the Civil War. They had run out of money, but Alfred Smith had made so much money. He paid for the bridge. There was a bridge, you see, there's a beach. Okay, you're going out Bellevue Avenue, you turn right there and go up. And then you see that stretch of beach there. It's Bailey's Beach, which is still the big social beach here, in Newport rather. And then there's a pond there. And they had to build a bridge over that right there. So he paid for it. So he completed it just at the end of the Civil War. Okay, here's the Ocean House. This is the second version of it. If you look closely at it, there are Gothic details on it. So this was the enlarged version of it. And again, there is a Stop and Shop on the property today. That's what this was. But this was torn down actually a long time ago. I mean, a lot of people see the hotels, like the Viking Hotel. If any of you have been to Newport, it's this big one. They're trying to make it, a big Gilded Age hotel. It was built for working people and middle-class people that came to Newport. The rooms are tiny inside. It wasn't. Newporters, after the cottages really took over, they only had one hotel that was acceptable to social Newport, and that's in the Muncher King House, which is on Bellevue Avenue. It's not a hotel anymore, but that was the only one that was socially acceptable in Newport. So if you were part of that. So these kind of went away. Okay. And this one is Bailey's Beach, which is officially called the Spouting Rock Beach Association, but it is generally called Bailey's Beach. If you're in the know, it's just called the beach, if that's where you go. And this building here is in 1900. It's been changed a couple of times. They've had problems with hurricanes, excuse me. So they've been washed away. But, and then further down, let's go here. And here we have on Ochre Point, which is, again, on front where, sorry, that map that I had up. But if you look at this, you see the wooden cottages. You don't see any of the great stone or marble houses that went up later. So this is what it looked like in 1885, and this is just before they started building the large, grand European Revival style houses. And here's 40 Steps, which is at the base of Narragansett Avenue, and it was kind of started, steps originally, wooden steps were put in by an owner that had children who lived nearby, and he wanted them to have access to the water, and there was a cave at the bottom of 40 Steps, so he had them do that. Of course, many hurricanes later, it now has stone steps, and you can still walk down when you see it, so. But it's one of the key features on Cliff Walk. Okay, here is where the men did prevail. So the building on the left is the men's club, the reading room, which was opened in 1853. And it was originally a house, and then it's turned to, it's kind of a reading club, or, men went to smoke their cigars and hang out with men. And on the right was a Canfield house, which was a casino, because Canfield owned a huge casino here in New York City, and then he wanted an outpost in Newport because there was so much money here. Supposedly, Reginald Vanderbilt one night lost over $100,000, and this was back in early 1900s. So that's it. So, and then also, it was a sporting haven. So here you have the casino here, which was not for gambling. It was built as a social club. McKinney & White designed it. It was one of their first shingle-style structures. And so here you have the grass tennis courts in the center, which are still there. But when you look at Newport, the first tennis open was there. You'd think New York, no, it was done in Newport. This was the first one. So, and then New York became larger, it became more important. And on the right was the Newport Country Club, which was one of the first golf courses in the country, not the first, but this is where the first golf open was. The National Golf Open was there too, and here we are. So men did have outs, and people still did the things they went to Newport. The first thing they went to Newport was to walking, hiking, boating, and basically it was still outdoors because the weather was just beautiful. Newport has really beautiful weathers. Last few summers have been really hot because of, I think, global warming. I've been going there since the 70s. I've never known it to be 80s and high humidity every day for a month. That just didn't happen in the past. But it's still beautiful. This year was actually good though. August cooled off. Anyway, if you want to go in August. Tour director. All right, so here we have a picture of a few of the houses. This is on Ochre Point. This is the southern edge of Ochre Point. And what you have are these four houses. And so towards the right on the cliff, which is on the corner of Ochre Point, is called the Anglesey, and it was designed by a man named Detlef Lanoux, and he came from Eastern Europe. And then the second house in was designed by a Philadelphian, what's his name? Hewitt. What's his first name? Sorry. And then the third house in is called Midcliff, because it's in the middle of the cliff. And that was designed by Peabody and Stearns, as was the last house, which you can find is Honeysuckle Lodge, which is behind that pergola pavilion that was built on the oceanfront. And if you look really closely behind the second house, you can tell when this was actually photographed, because you can actually see, oh, I don't know, did someone clean this up? I don't see it anymore. Oh yeah, here, on the midcliff in the center, if you look to the right, that's the breakers in the back. So, okay. Okay, and then also, before we get to the houses, I want to talk about how they evolved over the years. Because originally these houses were in the mid-19th century. They were almost all wooden houses. And they were nice houses. They were lovely summer houses that you would think of summer house and large enough. But then in the 1880s, in the end of the 80s into the 90s is when they started building the big Beaux-Arts houses, like the Breakers and the Elms and Rosecliff. But the houses, some of the houses that were there, instead of building anew, what they did is they altered them and enlarged them. So there's a lot of houses that have been enlarged. Almost all of them, even the old wooden houses, if you look inside of them and you go through them, they have more European-inspired interior detailing inside. So the dark woodwork of the mid-Victorian age has all been pulled out for the most part. And so that's where they went. You can see this as you look through the houses. But some of the houses, I'm going to do this one, goes through, it's even better. This one is Seaview, is built by the Connaughton family. And the Connaughton family were in insurance and electricity, early electricity, and he and his wife was a Lorillard, which was a big New York tobacco family here, large Lorillards. And so they built this house in 1870, but even before the person who built this died, if you look to the right, you see how it looked in 1885, and they made it Tudor and enlarged it by half at least, so it's twice the size of the house. And this was being done because if you wanted to be a player in New York society, you had to be able to entertain well at home. So you had to have large rooms. So they did that. But then you look at it, even I'm going to show you what it turned to in the 1920s. It turned into this. So that house turned into this. Is Seaview. Now they call it Seaview Terrace, not Seaview, it's Seaview Terrace. And some of you, if you're old enough to remember Dark Shadows, this is the house they used for the exterior of the show Dark Shadows. But it's just, so houses grew exponentially. So many of the houses became much larger and designed for the entertainments of that era, which were extraordinary. It would have been fun to be back there. I'm not sure it would be fun to be at all those parties because there were so many formal parties. And what I read about people that went to those parties, except for the big grand parties, it was more important to look like it was a success for you rather than to actually enjoy the party. So anyway, let's go back to the first house. So we're gonna go back to the first summer house that I discovered. And this is Stone Villa. Now, this photograph, was taken in the early 1930s. You can see the car in front of it. But it was much smaller. It didn't have wings and it didn't have the third story on it. And it didn't have the porch across the front. So the Middletons had this two-story house, center hall, probably 2 rooms on each side, typical plan for the era. But over the years, it began to grow. And here we have Here is the drawing room, 1870, about 1870. Again, a lot of clutter. This is what Edith Wharton was against. She called, it's just the furnishing of the Victoria was just too cluttered. And she called it a branch of the upholsterer's art. Upholsterer's not good design. But this is the way it looked in 1875. It must have been very fashionable then. But then a few years later, we have this room, the living room here. And a little more refined, a little quieter, still a lot to look at. Very few places for the eye to rest, but still it was a little better than it had been before. And then the last photograph is the living room fireplace wall in 1910. So you can see how that house, they had redone the interiors by that time, and they were all European inspired interiors. So this was a Georgian, room. So it sees how the interiors developed as well. And I think this one, I really like this one. This is the back. There's also a loggia across the back of it. I really like the little dog there in the center, the patch. But I think that's a really beautiful atmospheric look. But one thing that's interesting is here's the front again. And this was when it was occupied in the early 1900s, or right before the Second World War, and it was the Russian ambassador. So if you look at it very closely, you can see his livery driver there, but on the other side was the gentleman in the Cossack uniform, which was his personal bodyguard. Okay, this is the house that now has baby poo color. So it was gray here. And the reason they painted the baby poo is because McKimmon and White added that tower on the left. On the left, that's new, and it's shingled. And they think they wanted to make the other house look like the shingling, but it was a really bad choice. But anyway, it's a beautiful house, and it's a Gothic style on it. Again, this is the one where right across the street, the Ocean House was being built at the time, started the completion of this villa. Richard Upjohn, American architect, very famous. George Chaplin Mason did some alterations in 1878, and he was a local-born Newport architect. So he did a lot of high-end work in that. And then McKimmon and White, which you all know. I think he needs no introduction, did that wing on it. And what they did is, McKimmon and White, the house needed to be enlarged because they needed a large room to entertain, because the house didn't have that. So you see the wing on the left side here, the low wing. They moved that back so they could add this bigger wing with a higher roof in the center, and that in the lower floor was the big room. I'll show you the room that was put there. Here's the floor plan. If you look at it, you can see the big room in the center. So basically, the service wing back there had moved away from the main body of the house, and so they could insert that big room in the center. So here's some photographs. This is the front and back parlor of the house as by the King family. It's decorated by the King family. And then the room on the right is the library, which used to be the dining room before they enlarged it. And then interesting, there's a lot of Chinese elements to this. Again, China trade. They made a lot of money in the China trade. And the portrait over the mantelpiece is a gentleman that helped them build their fortune. And they did it in a European style, the portrait, rather than a Chinese style. So here's the big room they added in the center of it, which is like Kimmy and White. If you look at it, there's cork on the roof, the ceiling, and then on the top part of the walls were also done in cork. And if you look at the little blocks of stone, the windows on either side of the fireplace, those were done by Tiffany, but the floral ones, the larger ones above, were not done by Tiffany, and I can't find out who actually did those. But the mantelpiece is done in yellow sienna marble from Italy, and I love it. It's an old family, and so there's an old spinning wheel in it that was owned by the family. So from way back that someone had saved it. And this really was more of a shingle style interior, because when you look at the cases, the buffet and everything, they were done in, the styles were taken from colonial woodwork furniture. If you look at the bonnets and stuff in the this one's a built-in, but one of the reasons that the shingle style, which Mr. Scully called the shingle style, he called it that. Really interesting. All the elements, when you look together, it's a rich environment. At one end, there's a screen that can be removed so that you can make the room even bigger than it was originally. And here's what they call the summer bedroom. So this was the summer end of the house. Later, the family members lived there year-round. They had essentially lost a big portion of the money. They had some money, but not what they had before. So they stayed and moved in and lived there year-round. So this is the south end of the house. And it was really nice when it's open, and they usually live with the windows open so you can see the wafting drapes, and it's very nice. It gives you a really sense of, summer. Okay, this is my cover house, and George Chaplin Mason, and supposedly William and Amelia Sigourney lived in it first. They left it and it was bought by the Brown family. The Browns of Brown University Brown. Now I have to, somebody has given me some more information that maybe they weren't the first to live in it, so I'm just letting you know. But again, it's a charming house. The drawing was done when it was owned by the Brown family. And to me, again, it's just the quintessence of a summer house in Newport from the mid-Victorian age. And the swimming pool was not original, obviously. But in the afternoons, the loggias would be shaded so you could sit out there. And back when the house was built, now there's shrubs in front of it, so you really can't see it. But back then, most people left their shrubs down. They wanted to be seen and talk to their friends who were driving by in carriages. Sorry, keep doing that, don't I? All right. Here we go, and here's some of the interior of the room. This one, they put kind of French moldings on, and a lot of French elements were added, like the fireplace in the room on the right, which is the reception room. But they did leave the staircase. If you notice, the staircase is the original wood. So that would have been like, this whole room would have been dark wood when it was built, more of a Victorian look about it. But this is a house, they wanted to turn it up to snuff. So here is the living room of the house. Again, very 1950s. I like that sofa with the pleating on the bottom of it. Very 1950s. All right, now this is the first mansion that you can call it in Newport, and it's called Chateau Sumer. It was originally built, the picture on the left was built in 1851-52. It was a large stone house. Instead of using Newport stone, he wanted imported from, where did he import it from? Anyway, he imported the granite, Fall River granite, so on the house, and to enlarge it. And so, well, the one on the right, Chateau Sumer, so it was S.F.C. Bradford was the original architect of the house that you see here. And supposedly, William S. Wetmore, the man who commissioned it, he was a banker, also China trade, made a lot of money in the China trade. And he had a party which, the newspaper artists say from 2,000 to 3,000 people visited this house in the smaller version, but mostly in tents on the lawn. But that was one of the first huge events that I've read in Newport, that many people attended a private social event. At any rate, then you look at the picture on the right, and this is what it was changed by Richard Morris Hunt, who designed the breakers and he's famous for that, the New York architect. But you can see what he did here. The main tower is in the center, and off to the right is the loggia on that. He didn't do too much there, except change the roof line. So he changed the curved French mansard into a straight mansard. So it gave ceiling heights, much higher ceiling heights. And the service wing that you see on the picture on the left side of the house was enlarged. So more family reception rooms could put in it. And then the service wing was added to the back where that tower is on the left side of the house. And that's a servant staircase that goes up to do the house. Here's the Great Hall in it. So again, this is at Hunt did, so this is the first real mansion in Newport, great size. This is looking up through the hall to the glass on the top. It's not stained glass, it's painted glass. Here are some older views of the rooms. These were two rooms that were created by in Europe, in Italy, and then reassembled, packed up, and moved to Newport, and reassembled in Newport. Frullini was the gentleman's name, the artist, Florentine artist, who did it. And so these are the first rooms in Newport that were actually created overseas and then brought over here. We weren't the first rooms in the country. New York had the first rooms in the country that were created, that I can find, were created overseas and brought to the United States. Now this is an interesting, because what you've got here on the left, you have the ballroom. Now this is the original detailing of the original Wetmore House. So what this was done in a French taste, 1870s. Leon Marcotte was the designer of it, and he was a New York designer. And so, but then the one on the right is a room that was redone by Ogden Codman in the early 1900s, both done in Louis XV. But if you look at the styles of them, you see quite a bit of difference, how heavy the one on the left is, as opposed to the one on the right, which is very much in the Louis XV taste. So it's kind of, when you can, in the photograph of the, on the right, you can actually look through the portieres and look into the ballroom, and you can see that it had that arch top to the mantelpiece, very Victorian. And these are some bedrooms on the floor, the second floor, and the one on the left's been altered. The one on the right is the original from the 1850s construction. And then I like this one. I really like this bathroom. There is, if you look at the toilet, there is a little ashtray there, so you can smoke your stogies while you're doing your business. Very cool. But it's beautiful. Okay. Okay, this is what is now called Elm Court. It was originally the Cedars, and about every major architect in I think New York and Newport worked on it at one time. It was originally built by a man named Andrew Robeson Jr., and he's supposed to be the architect of the design itself. Now, this was a house in the Tuscan villa taste, as opposed to the Italianate villa. The Italianate villa, it was generally wood, and you know, the house that we saw originally on the cover was Italianate. So it could have a French mansard roof on it, but it was still pretty much Italianate. This one was done in the Tuscan villa, and basically the Tuscan villa, if you've been to Tuscany, you'll find the houses are different sections and they all have different heights. So this is really much a Tuscan villa, and there were about 3 houses in this area that were built in this style at this time, which might have been really impressive to see. So the house was altered like in 1874 by George Chaplin Mason, and then McKimmey and White did work in 1882, and then Ogden Codman Jr. in 1912 did work on it. And here we'll go to this. And this is from the photograph on the left. If you look really closely at it, you can see women in hoop skirts. So that's going to tell us this is 1860s, what the house looked like to 1860 on that. Now the one on the right, the owner of the house, Ogden Codman, did the glass awning over the door. And so this was the early 1900s, the owner of the house, the daughter of the man of the house. That's what she was driving. I think is that a four-in-hand? If anybody knows, is it a four-in-hand? I don't know. Somebody has told me different things about it. But anyway, the interiors had been changed. So here's a McKimmey and White dining room on the left, and this is the main hallway inside on the right. And Ogden Codman was originally supposed to redecorate the room there, but evidently they decided to do something less expensive. They didn't want to spend the money. But Codman did get to do one major room in the house, and it's the one on the left here. So it's a very Louis XV salon reception room on it. But on the right is a McKimmey and White room that was done in the tower room. Okay, the tower room. Okay, so I've got to move up really quickly now. So we'll just move. And this is Beaulieu. It was actually built by a man named Moreda, who was eventually the Peruvian ambassador to the United States. He made money in bird poop. Basically is what he did, because it was guano. And so what you did is you could chop it up and use it for fuel. And so he made great fortune at that, and eventually lost. It was later altered by Horace Trumbull in 1930 for Cornelius and Grace Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt III. And it's also then recently Riley and Ruth Buchanan. She's a Dow heiress. He was a diplomat in the diplomatic corps. So you can see the house on the left from during when the Cornelius Vanderbilts were there, and then on the right, they had tried to simplify it, like take off the awnings and to make it a little cleaner so it looks a little more French. And here is the ground floor plan for it. I mean, Newport didn't have usually great estates, but what was there, they did a beautiful job of separating from the areas around them. So they were actually very private. So, and you could stroll in the gardens. So they would be going on. So here's the interior of the house. And this was done, I believe this was done in the 1890s when the house was actually owned by Waldorf Astor. Waldorf Astor was the nephew of Caroline Astor, the Queen of Society. And he thought his wife should have Caroline's position because he was the eldest son and his wife was the eldest son. And she had nothing to do with it, so he eventually, in a fit of pique, he left America to found the English branch of the family. And he said America was no place fit for a gentleman to live. I believe that was a quote he did. So here we go. So here's the dining room that recently is how it looks today, but the photograph on the left is the way it looked when the Vanderbilts lived in the house in the early 1900s. And here we have just this Maslov Dubrzynski, I think is how it's pronounced. And this was a painting done in 1940. He was in Newport in 1940 and painted a lot of the interiors of rooms in the houses in Newport. And then I just want to show you how many rooms there are in this house. It's a huge house. If you look at it, particularly if you go up to the second and third floor, you see how big the house really is. So this was before the Vanderbilt era, but this was really a big, big house. All right, so let's do this. And this is Gravel Court, George Shefflin Nason house, and really more of an Italian age. And what's nice about this house is the second floor, if you look at how high the ceilings are on the second floor as well as the ground floor, it's a house of great height. So here we've got, and then we'll go here. Here is the porch as it originally was when it was open. It was actually built for the Tiffany family of Baltimore, a relation to the Tiffany family of New York, but not the Tiffany family of New York. And here's the back side of it. And here's some interiors. Again, they made it classical. So what they did is the Lanier family that bought it in the early 1900s redecorated it into the French taste. The current owners, the last owners, they've actually left, have tried to Georgianize it. They wanted to look more Georgian. But if you look on the right, this is the original. It's all French furniture. Funny, the piano is in the same place, still turned around 100 years later, but still in the same place. And here is the dining room. And if any of you watch The Gilded Age, you will know this house. They're using this as the home of Mamie Fish. And it's one of the few houses that's still owned by the descendants. The Cushing family still owns this house after 150 years. So it's a stick-style house, but it's really interesting. Here we are, the back of the house. They've enclosed a lot of the interiors of the house. The big building on the left side of the house was a studio for Gardner Cushing, who was a pretty major artist at the time. Not the biggest, but pretty big. And so here is a look, and if you look closely at this, Cushing painted this of his wife, the red hair, she's sitting in the corner. But if you look at the porch, you can see the exact corner she was sitting at when they painted this. And you can also see the colors. It was a multicolored house back then, which would have been, and it's been painted white for a long time. And here's the entrance hall. Now, the painting on the right, which was by Howard Gardner Cushing, showed the original wall finish. It was antique Chinese paper. What happened is they left the house and they wanted the trim to be painted. But no, they painted the wall surfaces. So they ruined the antique paper on it. So Howard Gardner Cushing, if you look at the photo on the left, that's how he repainted it. And this is the studio on the left here, which you can see. So let's see here. And then the orchard, this is the first really European revival style house in Newport, is 1874. And it was done, the Fearing family of New York built it. And it was actually a design that was imported. It was actually a villa outside of somewhere in Switzerland. And they sent the design back home with them. They had been traveling there. And here's an older photograph so you can see what it originally looked like. The interiors now are mostly Georgian, which were done in the late 1920s when the house was sold and someone else moved into the house, although there is a French-style staircase in here. Okay, so this is Fairholme. This is Fairman Rogers and Furness and Hewitt are the ones, the architects did, and they're from Philadelphia. And the family were actually inherited wealth because he was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, which obviously couldn't afford this kind of house. But it also went through different alterations, as you can see. This was done when it was owned by the Drexel family of New York and Philadelphia. And they kind of made it a little more Tudor looking. And then you have interiors here of the earliest days of the house. It's kind of cluttered, very Victorian. And then the house in 1930 was bought by a member of the Lippincott family, and they altered it into this Tudor house. So it's a really pretty authentic Tudor, beautifully done. And here's the interiors, we'll do that. There's the living room, and then we'll have this here. So this is the way it looks today. So the Gilded Age is back in Newport, so it's definitely back in Newport. And then we'll close with this, the old breakers. This was the original breakers, which was built by Pierre Lorillard, and he decided to leave Newport, and he wanted to open up Tuxedo Park. So that was the thing, his development he wanted to do. So he left it, and he sold the house to Phineas Vanderbilt II. And it was designed by Peabody and Stearns of Boston. It was destroyed by fire in 1892, in November of 1892. And the family was actually in residence. They were in mourning for their eldest son who had just died. So they normally weren't in the house in November, but they stayed there because of it. And evidently it's been recorded that Edith Wharton and her husband Teddy were visiting Condolence Hall when the house caught on fire, and they just died. They just went through the house completely. It has a big central hall, and we'll show it to you here. But again, it's a big house, and here's the floor plans. I don't know, is anybody interested in floor plans? I love floor plans. But you can see the big center hall here. So the fire, once it caught on, it would go up through the center hall, and the whole house was engulfed in flames. So on the left was the center hall, and then the great hall on, the library on the left. And then the kind of classical style drawing room, and an Adams style breakfast room. They were covering most of their styles, covered it all. And then this big dining room here. And then the last one we'll show here is, this is a pergola that sat on the water, which is long gone, but kind of elegant. Again, you could walk down to the rocks below if you wanted to. So anyway, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed this part of Newport.
Michael, thank you so much. What a wonderful tour of Newport Cottages we just had. It was fantastic, and it was wonderful to see the interiors. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would like to take some questions, both from our in-person audience and our online audience. Do we have any in-person? Okay.
I'm just curious to find out if the homes by Smith, were they meant to be year-round homes, or
no?
Not. When did it become more common for people to stay year-round?
That was much later, probably in the mid-20th century. What happened was, not all of them, there are still a few houses, large houses, that are still owned by the original families, and they can afford to keep them. But more and more, the older families have sold them off. I think what it was in the 50s that a lot of the families just didn't have the money to keep up like a big New York townhouse and here, or a big Park Avenue apartment. So what they did is they moved to Newport, where they could afford it because they owned the house already. So it wasn't a big expense.
Because I just noticed a lot more fireplaces as the homes got bigger. Some of them had fireplaces in every room in the earlier ones. Clearly didn't.
Well, but it wasn't for, after the 1880s, there was central heating. So most of the houses had fireplaces as decorative elements. So that, because oftentimes in a room, the fireplace is the prominent decorative element to the room. It's based around the fireplace.
Right, our next question. Did the Southerners, this is from online, did the Southerners return after the Civil War?
Only if they married well in northern families, no. They generally did not return because they just didn't have the money. The families that were there after the 1860s, there was a lot of Southern women that had married into northern families. As I said, they had intermarried for generations by that time. And so they returned, but basically their families were wiped out by the Civil War for the most part. There were a few, like the Wilsons, who were Southern family, but they went to Europe and they somehow came back very rich from Europe. And they had Confederate gold they were supposed to be selling, taken care of, right? And all of a sudden they come back and they're very wealthy. And they were a big family in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, early 1900s. In fact, the Wilsons, there was a joke about the Wilsons. Why did the Diamond Match Company go broke? It's because, and the answer is because the Wilsons beat them at making matches. They married into the Astor family. They married into the Vanderbilt family. They married into a British aristocracy. They also married in the Gillette family, which next to the Astors was the largest landowning family in New York. So they did well, and there were a few of those, but not many. The old families, the old plantation families didn't return.
Right. While I'm going over to ask this question, let me ask you a question myself. Were you able to have access to most of the houses that you wanted to?
Yes, as anybody who looks through the book, you'll see any of the color images were houses that we had access to. We had access, obviously, to the museum houses, but the private houses, Newport was a town. It's a town that everyone is kind of interested in architectural preservation and architectural history. And every time I went to houses to visit them, the families had folders of things they'd collected or had previous owner had given them when they bought the house. So there was a lot of information out there to get. I was very lucky.
Yes, I do have one question. Since we are reciting in the tradesmen and mechanics library here, I just wonder, was there a particular ethnic group that were building and constructing these houses in the third quarter of the 19th century?
Well, it would have been...
Were they Irish, Italian?
No, they were Episcopalians. They were Mrs. Astor said, so they were Protestant. Eventually, a few Catholics were in, some diplomatic Catholics married into Episcopal
What I'm
families.
trying to say is actually the people who were constructing the buildings.
Irish,
They were
tons of
all
Irish construction,
coming out
yes,
of Boston
a
and
lot
so
of it,
forth.
yes. The Irish came over to build Fort Adams there, which is a large fort there at the opening of the harbor. And so, yes, they were there and they went on to build these structures. Yes, tons of them. I'm sorry. I was just thinking it sounds snobby. Well, yeah, no. Sorry.
You had mentioned earlier in your talk that there's a resurgence and many billionaires are coming to purchase and restore. Are they maintaining the classical tradition? And who are today's, quote, society architects?
Well, we talked about Mr. Schwarzman. He's doing a remarkable job. So yes, he is restoring it to what it was when the Widener family of Philadelphia erected it in 1914. It completed in 1914.
And who are today's society architects at that caliber that we've seen all those names today?
You know what? I'm not really good at answering that question. I don't do research on that, to be quite honest.
Robert A.M. Stern
Well,
comes to
he
my
has done
mind.
some, but he has not done it in Newport. And the houses, everybody gets a separate architect. They're not names that are just famous names, at least not to me. They may be to New Yorkers. They could possibly be, because many of them are New Yorkers, but many of them are European. So they go abroad to get the architects to do the restoration, but sometimes it's a disaster. They had this one house at, Caravar. It was a French classical house, and it was built in to look like a famous house in France. What is it called? Anyway, and these people bought it from California, and they let these people take it over and just restore it, they said. But when they came back after 6 months, they had ripped everything out, all the fireplaces, the balustrade for the staircase, and it was gone. They couldn't get it back. So there are mixed groups here, but most of them are not. I mean, the big thing is Larry Ellison and Beechwood, which is the Astor estate. He bought that. So that's kind of a major issue in Newport. He was supposed to return it to its original brick and brownstone finish. He did not do that. And he basically gutted the house. So there's only the thinnest veneer left. There are 2 levels of basements underneath it. I mean, it's nice, but the house is no longer a historic home. It's not a historic structure anymore. And then he's also did this gardening out there with just these huge boulders. It's more of a California garden. And it's, well, no, and it's supposed to be because it doesn't require that much water. So it's actually probably a thing, but it just doesn't fit. When you're in a neighborhood where there's wonderful lawns and specimen trees, it's kind of different. So some people, and the thing, he hasn't even been there in 10 years. And in Newport at all, and it was supposed to be, he's supposed to have a collection of 19th century art, and that's what it was supposed to go in that. But so far, no sign of it yet.
Right, I do see there's hands up at the front, but if you hold on 1 second, there's a gentleman here who has a question, and then I'm going to bring the mic to you. And I do want to encourage our online audience to also submit some more questions.
Thank you, Michael. My question was more on your process on finding information. Was there one particular interviewee who shared a story that really opened up to something that you didn't know about? You don't really have to say who they were, but what was that story that they shared with you?
There were people that I did interview, and that's a catchy thing. It's questionable because, okay, for example, when I was doing the New York Townhouse book, I did the John Jacob Astor Townhouse. It sits where Temple Emmanuel is now, right? So I wrote to Brooke Astor, and she was so sweet. She sent me a lovely letter, but she repeated the same things that were in gossip books, didn't give me anything new. So the problem is sometimes if you ask the families, they tend to venerate the people who make the fortunes. And so sometimes they just, if it's several generations later, it's hard to discern if it's real or not. So you have to do a lot more research. If you're going to quote them, I always had to do a lot more research to find out if it was correct. Did that answer your question? Because it's kind of a thing. I do better when I can get source material, either newspaper articles or people that wrote during the period. I tend to work with those, and I tend to get more from it. Thank you. I thought this gentleman.
Yes, there's a certain number of people, but did you have a question, Beth? Right.
You had mentioned that the Gallettes were the largest landowners.
Next to the Astors in New York.
Are the houses in the book?
Yes, Ochre Point is. She is my publisher. I don't know why she doesn't know this. And that's still owned by the family. And they share the house. The family shares the house during the summer. It's the largest shingle-style house in the country. Yes.
Hi, August Belmont was Jewish. His name was Schoenberg originally. He was an outsider. He built Belmont Castle, also built the BMT. I'm wondering how he was perceived. Was he perceived as an outsider, or was he perceived as one of the elite?
Well, 2 things. I mean, no, absolutely. I think he was considered by many to be somewhat of an outsider, but he married into the Perry family. So he married into a very prominent family. So the thing is, and he had lots of money. And I have to tell you, generally, money saves the day. You know, no, seriously, the money, you know, it's like an omnibus, you know, all bump and go with society. As people lose their money, they're not part of it anymore. You have to have money to be in society because you have to reciprocate, you have to do it. And so I know like old families like, yeah, but still, once you've lost it for a few generations, you're just not seen anymore. You know, that's what it is. But no, I think he was there, but I think he converted to Christianity, which helped him a lot, the Episcopal, because then he built, if you're in Newport, go see the Belmont Chapel in the main cemetery, Island Cemetery in Newport. It's beautiful, but totally restored. It had been covered with vines that looked like a huge bush, and now they've restored it. It's actually really beautiful. The what?
It's owned by real estate agents who rent it out for parties and stuff like that.
No, the Belmont House, you're talking about the Belmont House. I'm talking about the Belmont Chapel in the cemetery. So that's different from that. No, you're talking about, yeah, the house on it, which is, yes, they open it for parties and tours now. But it has recently been restored. It has recently been restored. So, because it was falling apart, and it was recently restored, and it will now ready to face another 75 to 100 years. Bell Court was the name of the house. Bell Court, yeah.
And Michael, what are the formal protections in place? For example, here in New York City, we have, you know, of course, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and then there are historic blocks, but how do they ensure that someone doesn't come in and just, well, we were saying about Larry Ellison.
Problematic. It's problematic because I think the City Council and the Historic Commission is very much, and this is just mine, you may quote me, I've told everyone, that I think they're more involved with development and want to make money. There was a house called Rocky Point out on Ocean Drive, which was originally a house built in the 16th century. They allowed that to be torn down. And then the family who bought it decided not to build there anyway, and it's still empty. So you know, and so there are issues there. And the problem also in Newport is the exteriors of the houses are protected, but the interiors are not. So if somebody wants to do it, and I remember when I was living there 10, 12 years ago, we were trying to save the walls and the gates. They wouldn't even let them be protected. So like, let's say you have a major house like the Breakers, conceivably they wouldn't do it, but if they decided to sell it, they could do it. The gates around the place. So it's a little problematic. Sometimes they do good and sometimes no. But I think that's everywhere. You know, people just what it is. Yeah.
At the beginning of your talk, you had suggested that the economy of Newport sent something to Africa. What was it?
That was the triangle slave trade because the Newport made rum. And so rum requires a lot of sugar. So what they would do is some of that rum would go to Africa to trade for slaves. And then those slaves would go back to the West Indies to be traded for sugar. And then the sugar would go to Newport. So it was this, is that what
I
you?
was unaware that the Africans actually were into drinking rum. That's what, it surprised me. I thought you might have meant raw cotton or something like that.
No, it was rum that they sold, and this is pretty verified. I would think.
Oh, I'm
this
sure,
is,
but
yeah.
I just didn't know. That was very interesting.
I think everyone likes alcohol, in my opinion. And I am not a rum drinker, I will tell you that. But anyway, yeah, no, I think that's pretty much what this was.
Right, we're going to take one more online question and one more in-person question. And then I encourage you all to buy this wonderful book. So, but anyway, the online question, can you talk about the only home in Newport designed by Richardson? And that's from John.
Well, it was the home, it's the William Wetmore Sherman house. It's in my book. It just gets a chapter in the book. And it was done, there was an architect named Shaw in England. And in this country, we put shingles on it because the wood was what we use. But it's the same kind of style. So it's not totally, we call it Queen Anne, which had nothing to do with Queen Anne. But it's interesting about that because in England, they use these hanging tiles, which they use, but in this country, we use the shingles, as I said. And so the house is beautifully ornate, so it would be closer to probably most people think it's derived from Tudor, is what it is. Not Queen Anne's reign. There are different reasons why it was called that, but it is not. But it's a beautiful house, richly done. Stanford White did some of the original work on the house, and then he came back to enlarge the house and redid some of the rooms in the house for the Sherman family. Again, they needed a larger room to entertain in, so they had to add a ballroom to the house.
Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful book. And I just have a question. After all of the exteriors and interiors you've been able to see, what's your personal favorite exterior and interior? I assume they're not the same.
No, but I don't usually have them. I think my favorite is the house I'm working on, because I'm really interested in the story of the house, and I become interested. Now, if it's a really ugly house, no. But generally, if it's a pretty nice house and it's of its type, of its style, and it's a really good quality work, then at the time, that is my favorite. I mean, if you want to ask me overall, I think probably the European revival styles. You know, if I had all the money in the world and had 30 servants to run it for me, yes, I would like one of those big houses, so I could collect the things that I would like. But no, I do not have any of that, so that's it. So, but basically when I'm working, it's hard to say what is a favorite house. You just like, you know, you like what you're doing. And I'm really lucky because I love getting into houses, I love studying houses. It's a passion for me, and has been my whole life.
So, Michael, then let me take this opportunity to thank you so much. Your vast knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it seems to me there can't be much that you don't know about the houses of Newport.
I always find new things, though. I always find new things. New things come out, and there's new evidence, and so you do change as you go along. I learned that a long time ago, because the first time it happened, oh, I was wrong about that, you know, but you get used to it. You use the best knowledge you have at the time, and you write that because that's what you have. But sometimes different things can change. That one house here on the cover, I think it might have been another family. Both those families lived in the house, and the Brown family lived in the house, but there was another family who might have built it. So I've had some, you know, new things, and I like to divulge that. You know, I'm not perfect, but I try to do the best I can and give you a good basis, I think, of the history and the styles of the houses.
I think you gave us a fantastic history, and you really put it into context, and also the fact that you shared your enthusiasm as well. And I do want to, I don't know if the camera is now on me, but for the online audience, but I certainly want to remind the online in-person audience that this splendid book, packed full, as you can see, packed full of wonderful facts and pictures, is for sale. But finally, or almost finally, to conclude, is Victoria Dingle, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Karen. And Michael, that was fantastic. I was telling Michael before he spoke that a cousin of mine who, if she's not online now, will eventually listen to this, so I should say something. Barbara, thank you for having a house in Newport. I so appreciate it.
It's a nice place to go, isn't it? I agree.
It's so beautiful.
It is beautiful.
You know, when you're from, I'm a native New Yorker, so hard to please, and I love to walk, so that's the town. And what you were saying about the protections, it's a miracle that so much of it looks so wonderful still.
I think it is because, again, it's such a preservation town. People
Yeah.
do that, and people they're proud of their
Yeah, it's
houses.
beautiful.
So they want to try to take care of it, most of them.
It really is worth the trip, and Amtrak is great. I'm an Amtrak girl, so.
Kingston, I got off at Kingston.
Yeah,
I had
me
friends
too.
pick me up at Kingston.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming, Michael. It
you.
sounds like you
Thank
have
you very
another
much.
book in you. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And to our audience at home, thank you for joining us again. And it's so good to see so many of you back. And we're looking forward to a wonderful season ahead. Thank you.
Really?
And your poster, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I
you
hope
very
you'll
much.
all
I appreciate that.
join us for a glass of wine. I want to mention that we have what's going to be a fascinating
sometimes,
lecture on
you know, I love this
Edinburgh
stuff. I don't know if
on
other people
Tuesday,
do, so,
September
you know,
24th. I hope you'll come back for that. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Michael.